now we're going to talk about the eclipse prayer. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So the eclipse is when the light of one of these two great bodies in the heavens, in the skies, when the light goes total eclipse or partially goes. It's highly recommended to pray when the eclipse takes place. So the eclipse takes place because when the moon comes between the earth and sun, it covers the sunlight and the light of the sun disappears for a certain amount of time. Likewise, when the earth comes between the moon and the sun, it causes the light of the moon to disappear because it's been covered by the earth, covering the sun with the earth. This is when the eclipse takes place. In the hadith of Ibn Munir Ibn Shubar, people thought that when Ibrahim died, the son of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was an infant when he died, and this coincided with the eclipse of the sun. The people said this is why the sun had eclipsed, because Ibrahim said, the Prophet ﷺ said the moon and the sun are two signs of Allah. They do not become eclipsed because of death or life of someone. If you see any of them come, then call to Allah in supplication and pray until the eclipse ends. So it is recommended to call that congregational prayer is about to begin. So this is an announcement for this congregational prayer to call the people to come to the congregational prayer that is about to begin. So how is the prayer offered? So the format of this prayer is 2 rakats. However, these 2 rakats are not offered like any 2 other rakats that you would offer for general prayer. In the eclipse prayer, it is different. So listen carefully. Each rakat contains 2 rukus, and preceding each ruku there is a recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha and another surah, and there are 2 sujuds like usual. The only difference is we recite twice in each rakat and offer 2 ruku twice. The recitation, whether it is nighttime or daytime and the eclipse of the moon or sun takes place, the recitation is done loudly. So the former, as per the hadith of Aisha, in the first rakat, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam offered takbir, then he started to recite the Quran. He recited Fatiha and then a long surah, then he offered ruku. So to what Aisha narrated in the lifetime of Allah's apostle, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the sun eclipsed, so he led the people in prayer and stood up and performed a long qiyam, then bowed for a long while. He stood up again and performed a long qiyam, but this time the period of standing was shorter than the first. He bowed again for a long time, but shorter than the first one. Then he prostrated and prolonged the prostration. He did the same in the second rak'ah as he did in the first, and then finished the prayer. By then the sun eclipse had cleared. He delivered the khutbah, and after praising and glorifying Allah, he said, the sun and the moon are 2 signs against the signs of Allah. They do not eclipse on the death or life of anyone. So when you see the eclipse, remember Allah and say takbir, pray and give sadaqah. The Prophet then said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, O followers of Muhammad, by Allah there is none who has more self-respect than Allah, as he has forbidden that his slaves, male or female, commit adultery. O followers of Muhammad, by Allah, if you knew that which I know, you would laugh little and weep much. In this bowing position, he prolonged it by saying Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, and all the supplications and the dhikr one can say are similar to his recitation or less. Then he said Sami Allahu liman hamida, and then the followers said Rabbana walakal hamd, or then he recited the Fatiha and a long surah, but a shorter surah than the previous surah that he recited in the previous rakat. Then he went into ruku again and prolonged it, but did not prolong it as much as the previous ruku the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made. And then he said Sami Allahu liman hamida. The follower said Rabbana walakal hamd. Then he went for sujood and prolonged his sujood, stood up for the second rakat. In the second rakat he recited Fatiha and a long surah, but it was shorter than the previous 2 recitations, offered ruku, lesser in length than the other 2 rukus, then said Sami Allahu liman hamida, and what the followers said, then recited Fatiha and surah shorter than the other 3, then bowed for the 4th time and rise again and concluded prayer as usual. The Prophet did this, and after doing this and concluding the prayer, he stood, addressed the congregation, praised Allah, and offered salutations upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then he reminded the people of Allah, His greatness, and warned them of Allah's wrath. This is something we should do when there's an eclipse prayer. So the eclipse happens once in a lifetime, and we should not be negligent, and we should fear Allah. A while back there was an eclipse in the United States, if I recall well, and the animals were in great distress when this took place. This indicates that even the animals reacted to such an astronomical event which we cannot comprehend happening, and then process behind it, because the knowledge is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but when it comes to us we don't have fear in our hearts to rush to this prayer and invoke Allah like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who would hasten to prayer. So when does this prayer start? The prayer begins from the start of eclipse to the end of the eclipse. We estimate when it ends. It is a must we offer this eclipse prayer when it actually begins, not when we don't see it and we know that astronomers say it ends. But if the clouds is covering it, it's prohibited to say. When we don't see it visibly and visually, we cannot pray it, but we have seen it. But we just have to act upon what astronomers say. This is not permissible. Once we've prayed and the time is over, the prayer is done, we cannot repeat it. The sunnah is that the imam gives a small speech reminding the people, asking them not to be negligent about Allah's signs and Allah's greatness. So there's some scenarios. The one that comes late to prayer, what should that person do? So if the prayer is concluded, you arrive after the prayer, you cannot pray it alone, because this prayer was made to be prayed in congregation. While some schools of thought say it can be prayed at home, the most authentic opinion is that the Prophet prayed it in congregation and ordered us to do that. So if you arrive and the imam is rising from the first ruku in the first rakat and is reciting Fatiha and another surah before going down for the second ruku, what to do? So if this happens, the first rakat is done. So you continue reading with the imam, following him, and then when the imam gives salam, you rise up and read the first rakat. And this is performed in the same format of the eclipse prayer as mentioned, 2 rukus and 2 sujuds. But you make up for the missed rakat. So now we're going to look at the prayer of istijar, which inshallah we will be doing in the next video. So I leave you here. في أمان الله وصلى الله وبارك على نبينا محمد. أستغفر الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.